or engrafted into the mind and the heart, so that when people heard the gospel saying how Christ has died for our sins and that's how we get into heaven, it's not by our good works, people see how Christ died and suffered and was had the spear thrown in him, that crown of thorns on his head, the way he was beaten with whips, and the way he was crucified with nails in his hands or feet. Such a terrible way to die. But of course, that was Christ. Not only did he die in such an agonizing death in his body, but his soul. He says, "Now is my soul exceeding sorrowful and exceeding troubled." We read about that in the Garden of Gethsemane, when he fell down, as it were, and sweat, as it were, great drops of blood falling down to the ground. So we've got to remember that the intense suffering that Christ suffered on our behalf for our sins was to satisfy God that our sins had been dealt with. And so of course the earth rejected Jesus when he was put up on a cross, and heaven rejected him. He was in between the sky and the earth when he was lifted up. And Jesus said, if the Son of Man be lifted up from the earth, he will draw all men unto himself. And when we look at the death of Christ on the cross predicted in the Old Testament by the prophets, we read about in Samuel the prediction of the Messiah come in as well. There's a small verse there. And also we read about the Psalms predicting how Christ would die and rise again. In Psalm, I think it was 16, where it talks about that he went down into hell, and it talks about then coming out of hell, and it says, "At thy right hand there are pleasures forevermore," which is talking about the resurrection of Christ. And in Psalm 22, the last part of Psalm 22 describes Christ being raised from the dead, going and preaching to his brethren and such like, after he'd been crucified, and that he would be raised from the dead, and that he talks about him being born again, or brought into back from the dead, and that he went and preached to